I was in a coma, and when I woke up, the nurse told me my sister was laughing when she said, "She looks like she's about to die." She said it to the person on the phone, not to a doctor, not to my mother, not to anyone who could help me. She said it to whoever she was talking to on her cell phone, while she sat in the chair next to my bed like she was commenting on the weather. My sister Denny came to the ICU on day 4 of my coma. She stayed for 9 minutes. The nurse, Gladys, told me everything after I woke up because Gladys had been assigned to my room and she heard every word. Gladys said Denny walked in already talking on her phone. She didn't hang up. She didn't lower her voice. She sat down next to my bed and looked at me hooked up to machines with a tube down my throat and a ventilator breathing for me, and she said to whoever was on the line, "She looks like she's about to die." Then she laughed, not a nervous laugh. She laughed and said, "I know, right?" and moved on to talking about a vacation she was planning with her boyfriend. Flight prices, hotel pools. She went from commenting on her sister's dying body to comparing resort packages without taking a breath in between. Gladys stood in the doorway and tried to tell Denny that phones weren't allowed in the ICU, and Denny waved her off and mouthed 1 minute. 9 minutes later, Denny walked out still talking and she never came back. My mother was there every single day. She slept in the chair beside my bed 7 nights straight with a blanket and pillow from home. My father drove an hour each way and sat with me during his lunch break because he refused to let a day go by without being in the room. My best friend Ruthie came 3 times and read to me out loud because she heard coma patients can sometimes hear voices. But Denny came once, looked at me, told someone on her phone that I looked like I was dying, laughed, talked about hotel pools, and left. I had been in a car accident. A man ran a red light and hit the driver's side at 40 miles an hour. Brain bleed, 3 broken ribs, collapsed lung. The doctors told my parents on day 1 I might not wake up, and if I did, there could be permanent damage. Denny was standing right there when they said it. She knew how serious it was. She came once in 11 days and spent those 9 minutes planning a vacation while I was on a ventilator. When I woke up on day 11, my mother was the first face I saw. Over the next few days, people visited. Ruthie brought flowers. My coworkers sent a card. My cousin Colby drove in from out of state. Denny didn't come. She texted my mother and said she was glad I was awake and she would try to stop by that weekend. She didn't come that weekend. I was discharged after 16 days. My ribs were still healing. I got dizzy standing up. I couldn't drive. I couldn't shower without a chair in the tub. Denny called on day 3 of being home. She said, "Hey, how are you feeling?" Like I had a cold. I told her I was alive. She said, "That's great. Listen, I need to ask you something." She didn't ask about the accident, the brain bleed, the 11 days unconscious. She asked if she could borrow my car. Hers was in the shop. She was asking the sister who just came home from a coma to lend her the car so Denny could do whatever Denny wanted. I said no. She said, "You're not even using it." I said I was in a coma 11 days ago, Denny. She said, "I know, but you're home now, so." Like waking up from a coma was the same as waking up from a nap. My mother found out Denny asked for the car and called her. She told Denny her sister almost died and she hadn't even visited. Denny said she dealt with stress differently and that not everybody processed trauma the same way. She used the word trauma, her trauma, about my coma. 2 months later, I was back at work part-time. Physical therapy twice a week. Denny still hadn't come to see me once, but she called because she needed something again. She asked me to co-sign.
You won't even be recognizable when I'm finished with you, Rachel. Your limbs will be ripped off, and I'll make sure you're alive to see me eat them.
Sign a lease for her new apartment because her credit wasn't good enough on its own. I said no. She said, "Why not? You're my sister." I said, "I was your sister in the ICU too, Denny, for 11 days. You came once and the only thing you said about me was that I looked like I was about to die, and then you laughed about it and went back to planning your vacation. You never came back. You called to borrow my car 3 days after I was discharged, and now you want my name on your lease." She said I was punishing her for handling things differently. I said, "You didn't handle anything, Denny. You didn't show up. You looked at me once and told someone I looked like I was dying, and then you talked about swimming pools. That's not handling it. That's not caring." She hung up. She didn't call for 3 months. When she finally did, it was because she needed something else. Denny went quiet for 3 months and I thought maybe that was it. But Denny doesn't go quiet because she's reflecting. She goes quiet because she's reloading. While I was going to physical therapy, Denny was busy making phone calls of her own. Not to me, to the rest of the family. My cousin Colby called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He didn't even say hello. He said, "I don't know what's going on between you and Denny, but she called my mom crying last week saying you cut her off for no reason." He told me Denny had called our aunt and put on a whole crying performance about how I had stopped talking to her out of nowhere, how I was punishing her for not being emotional enough at the hospital. Like the issue was that she didn't cry hard enough in the waiting room, like the problem was tone and not the fact that she showed up once for 9 minutes, laughed about me dying, talked about hotel pools, and then disappeared. So I started making calls. I called our aunt. She told me Denny said she had visited the ICU multiple times, and that I refused to acknowledge it, multiple times. She came once, 9 minutes. I called another relative. According to what Denny told her, I had screamed at Denny on the phone and told her I wished she wasn't my sister. That never happened. Each person had a slightly different version because Denny had tailored each story to the person she was telling it to. For our aunt, she was the devoted sister who kept showing up. For another relative, she was the victim of my anger. Colby called me back. He said, "She made it sound like you went crazy after the coma, like the brain injury changed your personality. That wasn't just a lie. That was a weapon." Denny had taken the thing that almost killed me, and she used it to explain away everything. She wasn't just making me the bad guy. She was making me the crazy one. I called Ruthie. She lost it. "I was there," she said. "I read to you for hours. Your mom slept in that chair, and Denny is out here telling people she was the devoted sister who got pushed away." But I needed something Denny couldn't argue with. I needed Gladys. I called the hospital and asked to speak with her. When Gladys came on the line, she remembered me right away. I told her Denny was telling people a completely different story about what happened in my room. Gladys got real quiet. Then she said, "That is not what happened in that room. room. I was there the whole time. I asked her if she would be willing to write down what she saw. She said she would, but she had to go through the right channels at the hospital. It could take a couple of weeks. She said, "You deserve the truth on paper. What your sister did in that room was one of the worst things I've seen in 15 years of nursing." I had Ruthie ready to back me up. I had Colby who knew the truth. I had Gladys working on putting her account in writing, but none of it was ready yet. And Denny had a 3-month head start telling everyone her version. I could feel it in the way family members talked to me on the phone. The careful voices, the pauses, the way one aunt said Denny was very upset like that meant something. Denny had already planted her seeds and they were growing. My mother was planning a dinner for my father Kaysen's birthday, and she invited everyone, including Denny, and Denny said yes. The morning of the dinner, my mother Isadora called me. She sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She said, "I just want one nice evening. Your father deserves that. Whatever is going on with you and Denny, please just keep it civil." Her voice cracked on the word civil. I said, "I'll keep the peace, Mom. I promise." That evening, I drove to my parents' house. My dad was right there in the living room. He pulled me into a hug and said, "You look strong, kid. I'm proud of you." I almost lost it right there because this man drove an hour each way every single day to sit with me during his lunch break while I was in a coma. Then the front door opened and Denny walked in with Kylo. She walked straight to me with a big smile and said, "I'm so glad you're here. I've missed you so much." Loud enough that every person in that house registered that Denny had just said something loving to her sister. She hugged me. I let her. Because what was I supposed to do? Push my sister away in front of everyone at my dad's birthday after I promised my mother I would keep the peace? Dinner started. Halfway through the meal, Denny put her fork down. She straightened up in her chair. She leaned forward and said, "I just want to say something." The table got quiet. She said, "I know things have been hard between me and my sister, and I want everyone to know that I tried. I visited her in the hospital. I called when she got home, and she shut me out. I don't know what I did wrong, but I love her and I just want my sister back." Her voice cracked on the word sister. Her eyes got wet. It was so convincing. The table went dead quiet. Every single pair of eyes in that room moved from Denny to me, and the looks on their faces weren't confusion. They were sympathy for Denny. My aunt reached across the table and patted Denny's hand. "Oh, honey," she said softly. I was about to open my mouth, but before I could get a single syllable out, Isadora stood up. My mother pushed her chair back, and the sound of the legs scraping against the floor cut through the silence like a knife. She said, "Enough, both of you. This is your father's birthday. Whatever this is, it stops now." Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. I closed my mouth. And Denny, because Denny is always performing, dabbed her eyes with her napkin and nodded slowly. She even whispered, "You're right, Mom. I'm sorry. Tonight is about Dad." After the cake was cut, the real damage started. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in these little one-on-one conversations that felt like being pecked to death by birds. My aunt caught me in the hallway when I was coming out of the bathroom. She put her hand on my arm and tilted her head to the side with that look, the one people give you when they think you're the problem but they're trying to be nice about it. She said, "Honey, she's trying. Maybe you should meet her halfway." I opened my mouth to explain and she squeezed my arm and said, "This isn't the time or place." Then she walked away. Another relative found me in the living room. He sat down next to me on the couch and said, "Family is family. You can't hold grudges forever." I tried to tell him there were things he didn't know, and he held up his hand and said, "Tonight's not the night for all that." Every single conversation was the same. Someone would come up to me with sad eyes and gentle words and tell me Denny was trying and that I should give her a chance. And every single time I tried to say even one sentence about what actually happened, they shut me down. Not the right time, not the right place. Let it go. She's your sister. I ended up in the kitchen by myself about an hour after the cake. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Denny. She walked into the kitchen, and the second she was out of view from the living room, her whole face changed. The soft eyes went flat. The sweet smile disappeared. She leaned against the counter and looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. Her voice dropped to this low, even tone. She said, "See, everyone knows I tried. You're the one who looks crazy right now. So maybe next time I ask for a favor, you remember how tonight went." She said it so casually, like she was telling me the weather. And I stood there holding a wet plate, and I finally understood. This dinner was never about my dad's birthday for her. It was leverage. She wanted a room full of witnesses who saw her cry and try. She wanted a room full of people who saw me sit there cold and silent. She wanted to build a moment she could hold over my head the next time she needed something from me. Denny pushed off the counter and walked back toward the living room. Right before she stepped through the doorway, she put the smile back on, like flipping a switch. I left not long after that. I called Ruthie from my car. I told her everything. The speech, my mother shutting it down, the relatives pulling me aside, and then I told her about the kitchen. Ruthie said, "She threatened you? In your parents' kitchen? After that whole act at the table?" I said yes. Ruthie's voice got serious. She said, "You need to stop protecting Denny's image and start protecting yourself. You have Gladys's account. You have me. You have Colby. Stop waiting for the right moment because Denny isn't waiting." I went inside and opened my email. There it was. An email from Gladys. She had sent it that afternoon while I was at the dinner. My hands were shaking a little as I opened it. Gladys had written everything down. It was detailed in a way that only someone trained to observe and document could be. She wrote the time Denny arrived. She wrote that Denny entered the room already on her phone and never ended the call. She wrote the exact words, "She looks like she's about to die," followed by laughter. She documented the vacation talk, the flight prices, the hotel pools, the boyfriend Kylo on the other end of the line, the 9 minutes, the wave off to the nurse, Denny walking out still talking and never returning for the remaining 7 days of my coma. I read it once, then I read it again. This wasn't me being emotional. This wasn't Ruthie being my loyal friend. This was a medical professional who was assigned to my room, who stood in that doorway, who watched and listened and remembered. This was the one piece of evidence Denny couldn't cry her way out of. The 2 weeks before the next dinner should have been mine to prepare. Instead, they were Denny's. 4 days after the birthday dinner, my phone rang, and it was Isadora. My mom's voice sounded like someone who hadn't slept right in days. She said, "She's your sister. She's trying. What more do you want from her?" Denny had been texting me little nothing messages for days. "Thinking of you. Miss you, sis." I didn't respond because they weren't real. They were screenshots waiting to happen. And that's exactly what she did. She showed our mother the unanswered texts. Isadora didn't know about the kitchen. She just knew that one daughter was texting, and the other wasn't answering. 3 days later, Kaysen called. My dad doesn't call often. He's the kind of man who shows up. He drives the hour. He sits in the chair. He doesn't usually usually pick up the phone to talk about feelings, so when I saw his name on my screen, I knew something was wrong. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, I don't know what happened between you two, but your mother is losing sleep over this. She thinks she failed as a parent because her daughters can't be in the same room. That landed heavy. Because my mother, who slept in a hospital chair for 7 nights, who drove me home and helped me into bed, that woman thought she failed because her daughters couldn't sit at the same table. I wanted to tell him everything, but he sounded so tired. So I just said, I'm sorry, Dad. I don't want Mom to hurt over this. And he said, I know, kid. I know. A few days later, Colby called. He said, Denny called me. She knows you and I have been talking. She told me I'm choosing sides. She said you've been manipulating me. Denny wasn't just working. She was working harder than me. She was actively trying to pull away the only people who knew the truth. Then Ruthie called. Denny had reached out to her on social media. A long written message. It started with Denny saying she was concerned about me. She wrote about how I had changed after the coma and how she was worried. She used phrases like, I just want what's best for her, and maybe you could encourage her to get help. Ruthie said, she didn't say anything mean. That's what's scary about it. If I didn't know better, I would have thought she was genuinely worried. But Ruthie knew better. Denny was trying to plant the same seed with Ruthie that she had planted with the rest of the family. The idea that the coma broke my brain. I pulled into my parents' driveway. The porch light was on. Ruthie's car was parked on the street. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and felt the folded paper in the front pocket. Colby was in the living room and he caught my eye right away, gave me a small nod. Ruthie was in the hallway near the kitchen, and she squeezed my arm as I walked past and whispered, I'm here. Denny was already in the kitchen with Isadora, helping her stir something on the stove, laughing at something my mom said. Dinner started. Halfway through the meal, Denny put her fork down. She did that thing where she straightens up in her chair and takes a breath. She looked around the table with this warm expression and she said, I just want to say, I'm really grateful we're all here together. Family is everything to me, and I hope my sister knows I love her no matter what. Then she turned and looked right at me with these soft, wet eyes. The table murmured. Someone said, "Ah." She had practiced this. She had workshopped it. Everyone at that table was looking at me now, waiting for the sister moment, waiting for the hug and the tears that Denny had just set the stage for. I set my fork down too. I kept my voice even. I said, Denny, since we're sharing feelings in front of family, I think everyone here deserves to know the full story. Not your version, the real one. Denny's smile flickered. I kept going. You came to the ICU once in 11 days. You stayed 9 minutes. You were on your phone the entire time. You looked at me on a ventilator and told whoever you were talking to that I looked like I was about to die. And then you laughed. And then you talked about hotel pools and flight prices with Kylo while I was hooked up to machines. And then you left. And you never came back. The room went silent, the kind of quiet where nobody is breathing. Denny's face changed. She said, that's not what happened. But before she could say another word, Colby spoke up from across the table. Denny, you called my mom and told her you visited multiple times. You told me my cousin went crazy after the coma. You told Ruthie she needed to encourage her to get help. None of that was true. Ruthie nodded. She sent me a message last week trying to convince me you were unstable. I have the screenshots on my phone right now. Denny's eyes went to Kylo. He was staring straight down at the table. He didn't look up. He didn't defend her. Denny looked back at me and her voice got louder. She said, you turned them against me. I said, you weren't even there, Denny. How would I turn anyone against you? You didn't show up. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folded paper. My hands were steady. I unfolded it and I started reading out loud. I read Gladys's account from the beginning. The arrival time. Denny entering the room already on her phone. The exact words, she looks like she's about to die. The laugh. The conversation about vacation planning, hotel pools, flight prices. Kylo on the other end of the call. The 9 minutes. Gladys telling Denny that phones weren't allowed. Denny waving her off and mouthing 1 minute. Denny walking out still talking. Denny never coming back for the remaining 7 days of my coma. I read every word. I didn't rush. Denny jumped in. Her voice was higher now. A nurse? You got a nurse to write a report about me? That's insane. She looked around the table waiting for someone to agree with her. Nobody nodded. Nobody reached over to pat her hand this time. Isadora had been sitting silent through all of it, and then she spoke. Her voice was almost a whisper. She said, is it true, Denny? The hotel pools? The laughing? Is that what you did while your sister was on a ventilator? Every single face at that table turned to Denny, and Denny's mask cracked. Her chin started to shake and her voice came out thin. She said, you don't understand. Everyone was there every day crying and holding her hand, and I couldn't do that. Nobody asked how I was handling it. I said, you weren't scared, Denny. Scared people don't laugh. Scared people don't plan vacations. Scared people show up more than once. Something snapped. Denny's face went red. She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She was standing there with her hands shaking and her eyes wet, but not from sadness. And it came out, all of it. She said, you want to know the truth? Fine. Everyone was so worried about you. Mom slept at the hospital. Dad drove every day. Ruthie read you books. Colby flew in. And nobody once called me to ask if I was okay. Nobody noticed I wasn't there because nobody ever notices me unless I'm standing next to you. You almost died. And somehow you got even more attention. So yeah, I didn't come back. Because walking into that room and seeing everyone love you that much while I was invisible made me sick. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Isadora's hand was over her mouth. Kason leaned back and closed his eyes. I stared at my sister. I said, you were jealous. I was in a coma, and you were jealous. Denny didn't deny it. She grabbed her bag off the back of her chair and walked toward the front door. Kylo pushed back from the table without looking at anyone and followed her out. Nobody stopped them. Isadora started crying. Ruthie reached under the table and found my hand and squeezed it. I squeezed back. I sat there looking at the empty chair where my sister had just been.